Welcome to 22 at the Lips. I'm your podcast host, Alexis Hardwick, and this is the EMS podcast from EMS providers such as myself and other EMS providers, healthcare providers, and your random, average, everyday civilian and /or little caveat for today. I feel like when people think of EMS and think of paramedics and EMTs, and rightfully so, they think of an ambulance, which I mean, yes, we are literally tied to those every single shift. That is, congratulations, you're on the right track. However, there are other interworking parts of our job outside of just we pick you up in an ambulance and we take you to the hospital. There's a lot of other interworking parts that helps us run as emergency services. And today in that aspect is somebody who is a toxicologist. Ooh, fancy. But how we deal directly with that is poison control, but we're going to get into all of that in a second. A little bit of clickbait for you. So, Ryan, I said you are a toxicologist, but if you want to tell the people who you are, what you stand for, what you're doing here, the floor is yours, my guy.
I really would like to, but I have some questions for you first. You told me we were starting, and then you clicked the button, and like this video showed up showing an intro. How did you?
It's all editing. It's not me, I promise.
I am blown away. I just don't know what I'm doing over here. Okay, that was pretty cool. You have a cool background. You have these like video edits that pop in here.
It is all Master Your Medics. It's not me, I promise.
Well, this is impressive.
I was shown how to press a button. That's about as good as it gets.
This is impressive. Okay, so I think the question you posed to me was, who am I? I can handle that one. What do I stand for is a little bit more of a complex question. Most nights, I don't know. So my name's Ryan Feldman. I am a clinical toxicologist with the Division of Medical Toxicology at one of our academic medical centers. And what that means is I work with our Division of Medical Toxicology. So those are physician toxicologists. I'm actually a pharmacist toxicologist. And I provide consulting for our state poison center. So if somebody calls the poison center, be that a human, well, it's always a human actually, but be that a human calling about a dog, a baby, a person who overdosed on all their pills, somebody who ate some toothpaste, somebody got sprayed with something that was in a bottle. They don't know what's in the bottle, but they really feel weird and they want somebody to talk about it. I provide consulting to our specialists in poison information, who are the people who actually man the phones, a job I used to do as well. And helping identify what the toxins are, triage them, identify if they need to go to an emergency department or not. And then I also speak with the hospitals and providers and say, okay, here's the labs you're going to check. Here's what we're going to end up doing. Here's how you're going to treat them, decon them, all that fun stuff. So that's kind of my role in clinical toxicology. I'm also, by training, I'm an emergency medicine pharmacist. So I got a PharmD. I went on and did 2 years of clinical residency training, so in emergency medicine and toxicology specifically. So most of the time, actually 50% of my job is in an emergency department, sitting in the trauma bay, grabbing patients from the paramedics as they come in. And when you guys are dragging in somebody who's missing a leg or is in refractory VT storm, my job is to, assess the patient and basically ensure they're getting the most appropriate drug therapy based off the best available evidence and patient factors. So, and then, whip up the drug and get it in their body. All steps of the med use process regarding emergency medicine resuscitation care. And then my third job is as a assistant professor with our medical college and school of pharmacy. So I teach a little bit in a variety of topics and do some research. It's a lot of different hats, and I wear them on different days. Usually the hat I'm wearing is a mushroom hat, regardless, though.
Wait, define mushroom hat.
Well, oh, yeah, that's good. Actually, I think there might be some like weird internet connotations there. Not what I mean. If you're watching the video, I am wearing a hat with mushrooms on it. Also, I guess I should say this. I have a podcast called The Poison Lab.
Thank you. I was about to say, can you
where I talk about it's focused on toxicology. And I'll bring on expert guests or myself just rambling about a specific topic in toxicology. And the unofficial logo of that show, or I guess the official, is a mushroom microphone. So a lot of my gear has
I
mushrooms on
have
it
a,
because
if you're watching, I have a screenshot of it because you have the one of the 30-year-old in cardiac arrest.
yes.
And I had that one screenshot because I started listening to it, but I was at work. So I'm like, hold on. I got to sit down for this one. I use on my days off, I have my cross stitch that I sit outside and I tear up some podcasts. So yours is going to be on there.
Well, I
Good
appreciate it.
podcast.
Yeah.
Um,
I hope you cross stitch a mushroom. That'll be good.
I
Actually, you have?
it's
You have
like
an
it's in
example
the
here?
package right now.
Oh,
I'll send it to you when we're done with it.
yeah.
But is this the part where we go off on the 6 patient, 7, 8, 10 patient rights of medications and the importance of that? And
You want to talk like med safeties? I mean, you can. What? Are there 5
we're
rights
not.
now? 4 rights?
I thought it was like 5 of them, and then my partner, she was in paramedic school at the time, and she was talking about the 7 rights, and I'm like, man, I don't. But I was like, but
These
we use
patients keep
these.
getting more rights. Come on now. Where's my rights?
You're in my ambulance. No, it was funny because while she was like, we were talking about, I'm like, they are important just because sometimes, like, I said, I know I see a green cap and I'm like, oh, that's Zofran, whatever. But then you can get new packaging. You just always want to make sure. Literally, the next call, we're on the way to the hospital. I'm thinking I'm drawing up Zofran, and I keep drawing it up. I'm like, man, it's usually just like 2 mils. This has to be different packaging. I look, it's norepinephrine. So
Yeah.
your patient rights are very important.
So, hold on. Let me expound on that a little bit. So, one thing we do in the podcast that I run, some of the episodes, we will play this game where called Stump the Toxicologist, where someone reads a case and the other guest, usually a toxicologist, has to figure out what the poison was. More than once, it's been, unfortunately, and this sucks, an EMS provider drawing up the raw medication and pushing, instead of pushing like lidocaine, they push 4 milligrams of epinephrine and put the person into VTAC. And I'm like, and hey, guess what? Everybody does that. This is not an EMS specific thing. This happens in hospitals constantly. I give meds in the ED, and I have grabbed the wrong drug, had it 99% like lure locked in, and I'm about to, and I'm like, oh no. So you asked me what I stand for, and I actually do stand for something. I stand for designing systems of care that account for the fact that humans are consistently fallible and dumb, and we're gonna mess things up, and we should be able to deliver, high level care with that accounted for, and not, there are so many bright humans out there. We're all like, it's so cool when people are smart, and we get some real bright stars sometimes, but even the smartest person is an idiot at a few points in their life. And you can always count on people to be dumb. It's great when we're smart, but you can count on us to be dumb. So,
There's one thing you can depend on me for. It's to be a little stupid.
Yeah, that's why the 85 rights do matter sometimes.
They matter every time. Right. I want a couple little rapid fire get to know you before we start diving into the good topics. But first question out of 3. What is your favorite color?
Oh my gosh. Purple. Purple because it's blue and red. I'm told I got a lot of red energy, a lot of blue energy, and I just put them right together. And I'm a little bit. Sometimes I'm calming, sometimes I'm high energy, and I do like purple. Oh well, let me throw this at you. In the olden days, purple was the hardest to produce color, so it was a sign of royalty because the dyes to make it were incredibly hard to come by, and it also, I believe, reflects the lowest, or could be the highest wavelength of light. No, it's the lowest wavelength of light, I think, which correlates. You can correlate wavelength to the amount of energy something produces. And purple, I think, is the highest energy producing color. That could be completely wrong. I hope your listeners fact check me. Tell me I'm full of it, but I think that was my reasoning back in the day when I was forced to choose my favorite color.
So much depth and meaning.
Wait, what's yours? What's yours? I get to throw these back. Black.
It goes with everything, and it's a very classy color.
That's actually a great point. And it's actually, you're absorbing all the colors. That's why it's black, right? You don't reflect any light. That's pretty cool.
I'm not used to having questions thrown back. What is your favorite season? We have so many of them. Or if you live in Louisiana, you have two, hot and very hot, and then your random days of it's cold. What's your favorite season?
Is that where you are, Louisiana?
For now, yeah.
For now, very cool. I bet you it's pretty muggy right now.
It's disgusting.
I'm sorry. I'm in Wisconsin. We have winter and then 3 days of the other seasons. We actually have so I love summer because I don't get really hot days all the time. Where I live, which is Milwaukee, I'll give a plug right now. It is, I would argue, and yeah, you could say I'm biased, but I don't think so. Milwaukee is the best city in the world in the summer. We have multiple beaches, which nobody would expect because I'm in the middle of Wisconsin. We have all these like music festivals. We have the world's largest music festival, tons of great food. And it's just like summer comes around and a whole part of my environment just unlocks that's been frozen for the last 6 months. What's great though is with global warming, I'm slowly becoming a tropical city, which is wonderful. Because each year it seems like we get warmer and warmer. And so I live in tropical Wisconsin, which is wonderful. So I love summer. I love to be outside. I love to run, bike, volleyball, hike, kayak, all that stuff. How about you? I gotta get something out of this. You gotta tell me too.
I personally I like winter. I'm not the biggest fan of snow, but I do love the chillier weather. Summer is fun and it cures my seasonal depression for a day or two, but it's hot and it's hot here. I was gonna be cute and like have my hair curled for a shift yesterday, and within maybe an hour, I just look like I stuck my finger in an electrical socket. So
that's fair.
It's a great time.
Isn't it great when seasonal depression gets out of the way so regular depression could set in? Just really makes room, bro.
I feel better. Right. No, you don't. Yep. All right. Okay. So you kind of talked about what you do. How long have you been doing what you do? Why toxicology? Why?
Yeah.
When I think of pharmacology, I think of either just like in the ER setting, there's a bunch of people in a lab that are, and I'm not saying this is you, but it's like they're sitting there like, oh my goodness, an order. What is this for? And they just kind of sit around for a hot second. Or I'm doing our inventory checklist and I'm like, how do these meds get into this liquid? And then I'm like, okay, well, it's not expired, put it back. And then I move on with my life. I'm just being very honest. That's no. I know my meds. I know what I carry. I know what they do, when not to give them.
Yeah. I mean, you're touching on a couple of things here first, which is that pharmacy has I call it an iceberg problem. Most people who, when I say the word pharmacist, you probably think of your friendly or maybe unfriendly neighborhood pharmacist at the retail counter doling out drugs and asking you if you have any questions. You're like, no, I've been on this for 10 years. Leave me alone. And yeah, we have amazing, honestly, those people. I worked retail while I was in school and even after school for a little bit. Huge resource for the community, to be honest, and undervalued. But they're the most visible, and thus a lot of people kind of think that's what pharmacists do. There's tons of different career paths of pharmacy. So you get a doctorate in pharmacy. You're focusing on drugs, pharmacology, drug research, evaluating literature. Drug kinetics is kind of why I got into the game. That was my first love. And then you basically go out with that and you have the baseline to do not very much. You usually need additional training. So the people specialize in things like infectious diseases or emergency medicine or nuclear pharmacy or the FDA and regulatory affairs, all those kind of things. So for me, I was like, well, I'm technically a pharmacist, but I don't have a pharmacist soul. Like if you put me in a box, I'm going to try to claw my way out of the box. So I did an emergency department rotation as a student, and this real sweet old lady came in after she sawed her forearm off with a buzzsaw trying to make a birdhouse, which I was like, this is real life. What's going on here? And the paramedics handed me this cooler as I'm sitting in the room, and I was like, oh, this must be like her meds or something. And I look,
Oh,
I look in the cooler, and it's this sweet old lady's forearm, and I was like, oh shoot, I can really get out here and like past the bedside and do some stuff. And like I think that day I saw a person die. I held someone's arm down when we put a chest tube in. I did CPR, and I was like, oh, pharmacists can touch people. We can actually do things. So what I do in the emergency department, sometimes I'm verifying orders, yes, to make sure they're to satisfy some of those rights, to make sure there's no errors going on, make sure it's the right thing. But largely what I'm doing is helping out with the team during bedside resuscitation. So like kind of what I said, evaluating patients. So to do that, I did 2 years of additional training after school for residency. So let me, I guess, put it this way. So an EM physician will go to medical school, and then they will do 3 years of, which is 4 years, and then they'll do 3 years of emergency medicine residency training. For me, I went to pharmacy school, which is 4 years, focusing on drugs, their kinetics, actions, interactions, guidelines, evidence, all that stuff. And then I did 2 years of additional residency training. So about 1 year less than an emergency physician. In my second year of residency, I actually had a longitudinal appointment with our regional poison center. So I would show up there once a week and go on rounds. And then I trained to work the phones, which are the people who answer. If you call 1-800-222-1222, a number I will repeat multiple times today, that's the people who work the other side of that line. And they're there to help you with literally any problem, and are trained experts who can give medical advice. It's amazing, and they're free, and they have like millions of dollars of education backing them, either via themselves or the expert people who are on call to help out with them. And it's free. Oh my God, did I mention that? So I would sit there, I would answer the phones once a week, and just wild. Let me tell you, you operate a free public access line for the public and hospitals, you're going to get some wild, wild stories. The only thing crazier than emergency medicine, and I work in emergency medicine, I honestly think, is toxicology. We're one of the only people, like, there's only 2 specialists that get involved if someone tried to murder someone, right? It's trauma or toxicology. So we get the 50%, the ones that aren't a gunshot wound to the face. We're getting I was giving my friend arsenic for the last 3 days because they listened to their music too loud when we're in our shared door room. And I'm like, oh, okay. These are,
all right. That's one way to handle the situation.
yeah. So it's an interesting gig. I actually had no idea that I wanted to do toxicology, but it aligned really. I got the opportunity to do it, and a lot of times you don't know what you want until you've tried it. So being able to work in a poison center and then see poison patients at the bedside in the ED, it all kind of aligned. And toxicology really, most toxic drug actions are an extension of their pharmacologic effect, or it's like something to do with the biochemistry principle, which is it's just so cool. It's like I actually get to use some of the BS stuff I learned in school about the Krebs cycle and random things. And then I get to like teach about it, which is really fun. So that's kind of how I got into it. And then for one further, I guess, clarification of the role here. So I'm what you call a diplomate of the American Board of Applied Toxicology. So that's the non-physician toxicologist licensing board.
That sounds so impressive.
Isn't it? Oh my gosh. It means I get to put the letters DABIT after my name. Everybody's like, you're a bat? What are you talking about? But so it's a group of people largely trained through poison centers or clinical experience that are non-physician that help out with poisonings. And we focus a lot on drug mechanism kinetics. And once you're in the tox game, there's only about 1,000 of us. I'm the game in the US. Maybe I think there's probably less than 2,000 toxicologists in the US. And we all kind of know each other. We all get involved in a lot of the same cases, and you just get a lot of experience that becomes valuable because there's no literature in toxicology. So you end up having to go on, hey, I saw that once and this happened. We should not do that again, right? And just treat things based off mechanism. Like, oh, hey, this interferes with that enzyme. Maybe if I block it, we can prevent it. So it's real fun in that aspect. Did that answer your question? Because I think I went on 3 to 4 tangents.
No, it was good. You said the Krebs cycle, and my
Mm.
stomach has been low key reeling ever since.
Do you ever get base calls because someone's Krebs cycle is malfunctioning? Is that?
That's never in our chief complaint, but it's always
Mm.
in the back of my mind. Man, what if it's that gosh darn Krebs cycle again?
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to tread on this question lightly because I don't want to give people ideas. But what overdose scares you the most? Because I know like a lot of overdoses are scary, but what's the one that when you hear like for me, this is just for me, when it's a Tylenol overdose, I'm like, oh God. What is there anything like that for you or
Yeah, I mean, yes. The thing is, each overdose is an individual. If you've seen one overdose, ooh, I'm going to steal this. Someone told me this recently. They said, I think you had them on your show, Chris and Spence. It was like, if you've seen
yeah,
one EMS system, you've seen
you've
exactly
seen
one
one.
EMS system.
Yeah.
If you've seen one overdose, you've seen exactly one overdose because it's one patient taking X amount of drugs. Well, the amount of literally the mantra is the dose makes the poison, right? So if you only took, if you quote unquote overdosed on 3 Tylenol, I don't care. If you overdosed, but if that same patient 6 days later overdoses on 6,000 Tylenol, now I'm a little bit more puckered. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Uh,
Made my chest hurt.
but there are drugs that more reliably cause toxicity, right? Actually, you want to talk about Tylenol? It's kind of interesting. It's almost universally treatable if we get them therapy within 8 hours, almost no matter how much you take. It's the number one cause of liver transplant in the United States after alcohol. But that's only because we're not getting people treated in time. It's like a 100% curable poisoning, which is super cool that we have basically cured a disease, if you want to call drug toxicity a disease. But the only reason that we don't or miss some people is because they don't get to treatment on time. And that's usually because they've called too late or we
Yeah.
missed the diagnosis. So it is pretty neat. So I don't get too worked up about it. Tylenol is kind of like the backbone of toxicology. Any given day, I've got like 15 Tylenol cases on my board that I'm dealing with. And it's kind of like golf. You can get pretty good at managing it pretty quick, but you could spend a lifetime learning the intricacies of it. It's like a
Ooh.
very there's so super cool in-depth metabolic pathways, all the stuff that we get into. We have new antidotes coming out right now, which is pretty cool. But that's a hornet's nest for another time. If anybody really wants to learn about Tylenol, we did there was a 2023 guideline on how to treat Tylenol poisoning that just came out. Everybody put their heads together, and I had the lead author of that consensus statement on my podcast. So I think it was, I don't know, if you just Google acetaminophen, you'll find it. Sorry, I guess Google acetaminophen, the poison lab.
Right. There we go.
So what actually gets me freaked out? There are drugs that reliably will mess you up. So one of them that I think a lot of people do. So if I said like beta blockers and calcium channel blockers, that probably wouldn't rustle you. You'd be like, oh yeah, that makes sense, right?
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, like cardiovascular drugs, take enough of them, you're gonna get sick. And then the management of those are pretty wild, like throwing people on ECMO, starting insulin, giving people boluses of like 150 units of insulin, and then in a 150 kilo person, and then starting them on 150 units an hour. It's pretty. You start to do some wild stuff, and you can get people on up to like. We've had people on, I think, up to like 1,000 units of insulin an hour trying to manage these overdoses. It's wild stuff. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Don't do that without talking.
No, I was about to say, eat this pound cake while we do this. Jesus.
Yeah. So that stuff is really interesting, and the resuscitation is fascinating. And yeah, if we look at the America's Poison Center's annual report, the people who die, the most common drugs associated with fatality, cardiovascular drugs like beta blockers and calcium channel blockers, opioids obviously are ever prevalent. But some stuff people wouldn't think about, some antidepressants. So a lot of people, when they think of can I shoot a question at you? You don't have to get it right, and don't feel any pressure. What do you think is
right? I'll just edit out.
Yeah. Like if I'm like somebody overdosed on an antidepressant, like what's one that would, I don't know. Are there any antidepressants that scare you?
any TCA overdose.
Yes, full stop, full stop. You got it
Okay.
right. That is
Okay, I
what
was like,
that is what everyone is taught. TCAs are super deadly. And guess what? They are, but they're not around anymore.
yeah.
There's a new TCA. It's not a TCA, but there's a new drug in the antidepressant class that has taken over the TCA role, and that's bupropion.
Mhm.
So I don't know. Probably your listeners will have heard of bupropion. Wellbutrin is the other name. It is. Have you ever heard of bath salts before?
Yeah. Are we talking like the ones I put in my bath at night, or are we talking like Florida man bath salts?
Florida man bath salts. Yeah.
Okay.
So these are a drug structure called cathinones. Okay. So bath salts are cathinones. They all are derived from the cot plant in East Africa. Bupropion is a prescription bath salt, and it is a nasty, nasty drug in terms of its cardiac effects. It can block really important cardiac channels. So we get these people. Oh yeah, and it was taken off the market when it first came out because too many people were seizing at therapeutic doses. So it causes seizures.
Oh man.
It causes refractory seizures that
Nice.
can actually make people think that you have brain death and then try to withdraw care on you early. There's been some case reports of that. It causes cardiogenic shock, ventricular arrhythmias, and basically complete, you could say heart failure. I'm going to say myocyte failure. It literally, on a cellular level, destroys the ability for your cardiac cells to communicate to each other by blocking something called gap junctions. So you can't contract your heart well. You get heart failure. You don't depolarize it well. You get arrhythmias. So this is a widely prevalent antidepressant, and it is killing more people. It is causing more serious outcomes, we call so arrhythmias or bad seizures from prescription antidepressant overdose than all of the other antidepressants, including TCAs, combined. So this is the new TCA of our generation, and a lot of people don't know about it. So that's been one of my drums that I've been beating for a while. It's like, hey, we got a new scary one out here.
Yeah. Had
So
no clue, man. Had no clue.
yeah, I think we do like 4 episodes on that on the Poison Lab if people want to learn more. But it is that is certainly one that scares me. You know, pharmaceuticals, most of them, I can figure out a way to get you through. The things that really are scary often are industrial accident exposures or like chemicals, right? Because tox is not just drugs; it's everything that's out there. So, you know, if you want to die from plants, make a tea out of a weird poisonous plant, and that'll probably do it. And we won't have much that we can do. Don't do that, by the way.
Please don't do that. I was about to say, how do I wait? Nobody do that,
Yeah,
please.
well, let me be clear. But when I get bad cases of plant overdose, a lot of time that is, you know, it's somebody who is, it's not someone who ate a leaf or a berry. It's like, oh, they made a tea, not realizing what it was, or they misforaged something. And then we get into like, hey, actual poisons designed to kill living things. So some rat poisons, some gopher bait. There's something called zinc phosphide. Zinc phosphide, basically, when you ingest it, it turns into phosphine gas in your body, and you can actually then start burping out this horribly dangerous chemical to paramedics and other people around you, which is bad.
Good.
But there's case reports of people putting this gopher bait around their house, and then once it gets into water, it dissolves into gas, and then the gas is actually what's toxic. It inhibits the electron transport chain like cyanide does. And there's case reports, unfortunately, of like whole families dying because dad put gopher bait underneath the trailer and then it rained. So that makes me sad. Hydrogen sulfide gas, that makes me sad. You ever heard of knockdown gas?
No.
Okay. So if you ever look at your toilet plumbing or look under
Okay.
the sink, look under the sink in your house, you'll see that there's a U shape to uh, the piping. And the reason there's a U shape is because it's actually a gas trap. There's some water in there. So someone's gonna have to Google this. It's gonna be bad to explain, but it's because The decomposition of organic material from the sewers creates something called hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is a super deadly, just think about it like gaseous cyanide, because that's exactly what it is. And we have less well-established treatments for it. So it's actually in the sewers. So let's say you're a sewer worker and you happen to hit a pocket where there's been like a blockage and a lot of hydrogen sulfide is built up. You drop down there, there's no oxygen. So you asphyxiate quickly from no oxygen, and you're actually just breathing in pure, basically cyanide. So you collapse. Well, let's say you were working with your friend, a paramedic, and you see them go down a hole and not come back up. What are you going to do?
I'm not going in there.
Okay, well, I wish more people had that idea. But then
if it's my partner, I'm going in and check on her. Like, what you doing, girl?
Right.
Yeah,
we want to help, right? That's why we're all in this. Well, then you go down there and check there, and guess what? Now I have two people who just collapsed, and then a third happens. So this happens in manure pits on farms. It also happens in kind of enclosed spaces in some sewer workers. Actually, a lot of sewer workers will have hydrogen sulfide gas meters on them, but that's one that freaks me out. I actually, when it comes to gases, it's all about your soak time. If you're not in there very long, it's a quick in and out. You might not get a big exposure, but if it's a bad exposure, those are pretty hard to treat. Those are just some. Oh, and then paraquat and diquat. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of those. They're now in things like Roundup weed killer. Or paraquat is in a very specific herbicide. So these are herbicides. They're designed to kill plants, but they kill people really, really well. It's a way more common problem in other countries. So like Sri Lanka. I'm actually not sure if that's a country. I actually help out with. I do apologize to any Sri Lankans who are listening to the podcast. I'm not a geographist. I know there are multiple countries. I don't know them all. But so one of my jobs is I actually consult sometimes. I just started getting involved in helping out with the poison center in Nepal. And I kind of hear about some pretty wild things through there and get to help advise on how to manage them. They have things like paraquat and diquat there. We are starting to see more of it in the United States. The thing with these substances is they get in you, and it takes like 4 days before they will start to really cause damage. So let's say you take a sip out of a Gatorade bottle that had some diquat herbicide in it. Oh, I hurt myself. You call poison control. I said, I don't know what this was. Or you call EMS, and they send you into the ER, and you're there. You're going to look totally fine for the most part. You might have a little bit of oral ulceration. Then you're probably going to get discharged home. And over the next 4 days, that diquat is going to seep its way into all of your organ systems. It's what we call a bipyridal, but it basically steals electrons from anywhere that's available, like oxygen, and then shoves them into your proteins and destroys the proteins. It basically breaks down not only every organ system, but every cell, every protein that you have. And it gets sequestered frequently in the lungs and the kidneys. So 4 days later, you're going to be short of breath. Your kidneys are going to start failing. You're going to show up back to the emergency department with like a pretty nasty ARDS, whiteout lung type picture. And there is almost zero that we can do about it. There is no treatment, no antidote, nothing. There used to be a nomogram that was like, oh, calculate how much paraquat your patient ingested. Greater than any? Well, they'll probably just die, put them on hospice. It was like, so there are some really scary things out there. Luckily, due to some good regulation, we don't have as many of them in the United States, but we still run into them for a lot of reasons. Heavy metals. Yeah, I mean, those are just some examples of hard to treat poisonings or things without a lot of antidotes. And unfortunately, you just have to watch it take its course. Oh, yeah.
So I'm never going to use a pesticide ever again. Never going to use weed killer. I'm not a hypochondriac, but stuff like that scares me, man.
Just
like,
don't drink it. Don't drink it.
I'll do my best.
The diquat we have in the U.S. is relatively dilute in like I think Spectracide weed killer has some. I don't know if you're gonna. I think unmentioned brand weed killer. You can delete out all the brand names that I've said if it's going to get you in trouble. But And I will go ahead and put a disclaimer that I don't remember all weed killer brands with perfect accuracy, so this could be incorrect. But largely it's okay. I'm not seeing people die from this left and right, but when I do get a call that somebody took a sip of a substance that contains a quat, as we call them, I get a little more nervous, and we treat those a little bit more aggressively. That's why history is so important in finding out what they actually took, because that's the only thing we have to go off half the time.
What's so scary is that like the general public, I mean, I don't want to say they don't need to know this kind of stuff because like no, but also like people don't know this kind of stuff, and
Yeah.
man,
Hey, I mean, we put those like little poison guy stickers on stuff.
I'm just thinking of some of the clientele we run on, and
I know it's hard.
I mean, I can't say anything. When I was teaching high school English, I had a student who thought it would be funny to open the whiteboard spray cleaner and like act like he was going to take a chug, and then did. And I knew it was safe. I was just like, whatever. But he was walking out the classroom because I'm like, you might need to go get some water. Like, I don't know if that's toxic. And then he's like halfway out the door. And I'm like, but wait, what if the water is actually toxic? You might need to go to the school nurse. I made that kid so scared. He never did it again.
That's
So
good. That is good. We do get a lot of calls from school nurses at the poison center too. So
I'm sure
there's all sorts of wacky things people are doing.
Speaking of poison control, so I know people believe that we can do anything in EMS, and to an extent we can question mark, but we do have limitations. It's like I don't want to tell people that and then be like, I'll never call it again. No, I'm just kidding. But I mean, there are things that like we can and can't do. There are things we do and don't carry. And that's where in our training the poison control comes in. And I have had several instances where I didn't call because I'm like, I don't know what to do. I call because I'm like, man, like my patient, I think last time I called, I think she had taken like maybe 10 Zoloft. And I was like, man, or not even Zoloft. I don't remember what it was. I remember it was a big name antidepressant medication. I'm like, man, like, I don't know what to look out for in this large of a magnitude of these many. And I called and they were like, oh, well, you'll see hypotension. And I'm like, her systolic is 93. They're like, oh. And I'm like, all right, here are the rest of the vitals. They're like, we're going to call this hospital. I'm like, please do. I'm going to go get to work. Thank you. Her heart rate ended up dropping. I'm like, the last one I saw was like 50. And I gave atropine and it got better magically. But I was like, I'm glad I called. I am a huge proponent of poison control. Literally on shift last night, my partner's family members were calling her because they're like, hey, I think the girl's like 2. They were like, she drank half a bottle of kids Tylenol. What do we do? And I'm like, I looked at my partner, I'm like, call poison control because that's all I'm going to start a line and like listen to what they say. But like, we support the poison control very heavily.
That's fantastic. That's what I love to hear. We need to get those calls.
Like,
I mean, are you getting kind of like what role can we help with in EMS?
Yeah.
I don't know if I used to get calls from EMS providers all the time when I actually worked the phones. I loved it. I mean, you guys are dealing with real stuff. You have a lot of things to evaluate. You don't necessarily need to take on an entire medical subspecialty all by yourself. And I think you're like, yeah, we can do anything, and you absolutely can. But listen, like when you're over concerned, do you ever call medical control like for additional?
Yeah, and there's I mean there are things we're taught that like if there's the perfect example, like if we have a preeclamptic patient, or rather an eclamptic patient, we're giving them mag sulfate, but like if I'm giving a whole bunch of mag, I'm going to call online medical control because I'm like, I'm giving mag. Like her blood pressure just dropped. I have calcium gluconate. I can give that, right? Like we have those little things, but like there are things that like I don't carry. I'm going to be very honest and expose myself. I forgot what overdose it is that there's that blue that you give.
Methylene blue?
Yes. Like
Yeah.
I I
There's a
don't.
few. There's a few.
I,
Usually for methemoglobinemia, like somebody did a bunch of popper or like drank a thing of poppers or something.
yeah,
It,
something like that.
all right. So let me just put it this way. There are scenarios when you would call medical control, right?
Correct.
Medical control calls us. So,
Oh,
I don't,
that's good.
I literally, I mean, now that every EMS system is different. Where I work in the emergency department, our ER does medical control for our county EMS. And if there's an overdose case, the medical control pops in, comes talks to me, and like, hey, what are we going to do here? And if you are bringing that patient to the ER physician provider, the NP, whoever's taking care of them, they are going to call us.
Mm-hmm.
We are already going to be involved in the care.
Yeah.
So it would be a silly thought to think like, oh, I can handle this. I don't need to call poison control. We're going to be involved. The people who you're bringing to are going to call poison control. Everybody should call poison control. And I'll bring up some things here that I absolutely think were underutilized by EMS many times. Listen, the likelihood you're going to need to treat someone, that's going to be pretty variable. Just because they said they took a lot of stuff
It
doesn't
doesn't mean they
mean
necessarily
it
did.
doesn't mean they did, and it doesn't mean they're going to get sick right in front of you, right?
Yeah.
Because if they just took it 10 minutes ago, they might be fine all the way to
Mhm.
the ER. And even if you did need to treat it, right? Well, let's think about, there's a million poisons. There's actually infinite poisons, right? Water actually is poisonous. If you drink 2 gallons of it in 15 minutes, you could die, right?
Everything can kill you, is what I'm
Right.
gathering.
Exactly. There's a famous Swiss physician, Paracelsus. He goes, the dose, all things are poison and nothing is without poison. The dose alone is what determines a poison, right? I can overdose on anything. Now, so since there's infinite poisons, there's actually only 50 antidotes. So if you do the math there, that's going to be 0.000000000 infinite 1% chance that you're really going to need to use an antidote in poisoning. And then if you look at it are you going to need to use it in the ambulance? That's probably even less. Not that it's not. So 99.999% of toxicology is decontaminating, getting the poison out of the patient or off the patient. Expectant management. So what should I expect to see? What do I need to mentally prepare to treat? Right. And then supportive cares. And you guys are experts at supportive cares, right? But what you might not be an expert at is what could this poison do? And you know what? There's people who've worked in toxicology for 10 years and they're still not experts at that because there's infinite poison. So let the people who have been doing it for 10 years at least help you figure that out. So a lot of it is just triaging, right? And that is what poison centers are designed to do. There's actually a lot of, this is how we make our money, which by the way, we don't make money at a poison center. We are a free public service, but we keep people who don't need to go to the ER out of the ER. That person who drank Tylenol, I could do a little bit of math. And if you're below my triage threshold, you could probably keep that kid at home and you then get to bounce your transport and, I don't know, go play games or something. I don't know. I don't know what we do. Just kidding. By the way, I have done a ton of ride-alongs with EMS through our system. And
So you get it. Yeah.
You guys do amazing things. I mean, it's really cool. But literally, it's one of my, I think it would be a job. I actually tried. I asked one of our EMS people. I was like, I wonder if I could somehow, can we get like a pharmacist out on those rigs once a shift just so I could like see what's going on? Because it's a lot of fun. But anyways, so that's one reason to call poison control is we're going to help you understand what you might see, whether or not you even need to go to the ER, which you really not always do you need to. And we're going to help you do that mental prep work of what you're going to need to treat. And goodness forbid, if there is something to treat, we can help make sure it's the right thing to treat, because there are some caveats in poisoning where supportive care is a little bit different. Like intubation of an aspirin patient can actually be negative and cause some problems. There are some things that, once in a while we run into something that's beyond our normal ABCs, and it's a good time to bring us in. But let me give you another cell here. When somebody comes into the ER, EMS, you guys are golden book of history. Like, I got this altered person who was found with pill bottles. They're certainly not telling me what they took. If you brought in the pill bottles, that's awesome. But uh, if not, then we get the history that you prevent verbally, and then you're off into the night to save more lives. And we are sometimes stuck with absolutely nothing else.
Right.
And we're like, okay, well, we'll figure this out based off what they look like in some labs, maybe, because we can test for like 0.01% of things. Uh, but if you called the poison center and provided them with that initial history, that ER is also calling the poison center. And now we have the poison center who can help clarify and provide history throughout the course of care. So the poison center, after we get consulted, we follow either electronically through access of their EMR or via telemedicine every single day that the patient is in the hospital and in the ER. And we are giving recommendations on how to treat, how to monitor, what labs to draw. And we now know a lot about the history because we got to talk directly to the source. And if there's any questions after the ER provider who got the patient in sign out, who got the history from the paramedic who left 6 hours ago and is basically making up a history as he hands the patient off to medicine. Once they mess that up through the 6 degrees of separation, if one person like the poison center has the history, that's helpful, right? So
Mhm.
if you call the poison center, you're actually probably facilitating better patient care. And then here's the third reason. We are in a system of care, right? Like you guys, the EMS is all systems of care. You guys know all about this. It's like, which hospital to take them to? What do we do? We had a great case the other day, I don't know. This person ingested a bottle of mercury in a self-harm attempt. And that's pretty scary, right? I think most people know mercury is a poison. And
Mhm.
it's actually there's 3 different types of mercury. Elemental mercury is that quicksilver stuff, and what's funny is that actually doesn't get absorbed when you ingest it orally. But you could drink people have drank that and had no symptoms. But if you vacuum it, you could kill a bunch of people because it has to aerosolize in the air in order for people to get symptoms from it. You have to inhale it. So we got a
Oh,
call about a person who ingested half a bottle of mercury, and the paramedics wanted to know if they were at risk of breathing in any of the mercury. Great question.
that's a good
Fantastic
point.
question,
Yeah.
right? And oh my gosh, please call about those because we help with decon and PPE all the time. Well, the person ingested inorganic mercury. It's called mercuric chloride. And there's no off gassing of that. It's not really an issue. So it was a great question for them to ask. But because they called us and I knew I had a potentially fatal mercury ingestion going on, I called ahead to 2 hospitals that were in the area. So there is a chelator agent. A chelator is a drug that will bind metals in your blood and help you excrete them. So hopefully catch them in the blood before they get into your tissues. If the drug is already in your tissue, I'm kind of screwed. It's not going to do much, right? Because it doesn't get into your tissue and pull it out. But this was early. EMS had him. They were transporting him to the hospital. I called 2 hospitals. I was like, hey, I think they're bringing him to you. Get this chelator ready. Sometimes they need to get it from a different hospital entirely and have it transported. They met the patient at the door with the chelator. They got it in him while he was still absorbing the mercury. This was a probably fatal overdose of mercury. 0 effects from it because we caught him at the door with
Wow.
the antidote in time, and we published that case report. So I think if you Google like Ryan Feldman mercury, it'll probably come up. But this is an example of how EMS giving us the tip off let us get the system engaged to a point where we were able to save this person's life. Where probably if he had just showed up at the ER, they would have gotten initial labs, called us. Now we're an hour, maybe 2 hours in.
Yeah.
Then we're trying to get the antidote 2 hours later. That's 5 hours of mercury absorption, and sometimes you literally only have like a 1 or 2 hour window to do anything meaningful in these poisonings. So we help in a lot of ways that I think people don't know, with continuity of care, with organizing systems, with actually providing the treating team with monitoring and treatment recommendations from experts. So get us involved early, man. Don't wait for the ER. You wouldn't wait to get an IV line until they get to the ER. Why are you waiting to get the poison center involved? We're happy to hear about it and get a tip off and have a better history straight from the source. Plus, we like talking to EMS. You guys are way more fun than most of the people.
True. No, I agree with that. Like there are even some medications that we carry that like I know it's in my protocol that I can give, but there's still that part of me that I'm like, man, I don't know. I'm gonna do a little bit of CYA and I'm gonna call anyways. And that's 100% how I feel about poison control is like when I take it at face value, like, did this patient actually take this? But you know what? They said they did. Who am I to question? I'm gonna act like they did.
Right.
And I'm gonna call poison control because I kind of like you said, you don't have to be a master of 10 years of experience that these guys have. I don't have that. And you know what? If it's one less thing I have to think about for a second, I'm gonna utilize that. So I'm gonna call poison control because this is above my pay grade.
Yeah, man. Call that cognitive deloading. You guys focus on the stuff that really matters. We'll deal with the made up stuff. It'll be, and yeah, I'm not saying you got to call us on every single call you ever go out on, but certainly if it's something you never heard of, or if you have any, here's the thing, it's actually never wrong to call the poison center. So if you're ever thinking about it, just do it.
Right? It's not going to hurt anything. It's free. What's that number?
1-800-222-1222. I actually got married on 2/12/22, which is the last 5 digits of the poison center number. So that's it was a complete accident, but that's my claim to fame.
Was it?
Yeah. I mean, a little bit. It was like, I had like 2 options and I was like, well, I guess that date works a little bit better. So.
That's so nerdy. I appreciate it. Do you feel like you see more or like you hear about more cases of like pediatric versus adults? Because I feel like with pediatrics, you have all those cases of like, I'm babysitting this kid, or it's my grandkid, or I'm a first time parent or second time. I mean, I'm not going to single out first time parents, whatever. But I'm scared because this thing happened. Do you feel like you get a lot more of those than you do like so downed a bottle of I don't know, Zoloft or something like that?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at poison center calls in general, so first off, calls have been declining year after year since like 2008, probably because of the internet. People are going and finding weird stuff on the internet,
Dr. Google
or whatever. Yeah. And we treat both the public so about 50% of our calls are for the public and 50% are from the hospital. And of those, about 50% are children. And children are, we call them pediatric exploratory ingestions. Kid licked a leaf. I can't tell you how many dads have had to talk off the ledge because their kid ate toothpaste. But then we get real ones. It's like, oh, kid is drooling and I can't find the button battery for my remote.
Oh,
it's
great.
Like, oh, God. Yeah. And that's a really scary one because it basically cooks your esophagus and you can get mediastinal perforations, all sorts of stuff. It's bad. So we get a ton of kid calls. A lot of them are exploratory, and a lot of them just need someone to monitor them remotely, like a poison center specialist in poison information. And then they get to hang out at home, don't have to go into the ER. We do get kids who get into too much Tylenol or, one pill that can kill. The one pill can kill, right? That's and then they go in. A really sad trend right now actually is the rise in pediatric opioid overdose deaths from getting into a pill found in the house. I don't know if you've heard about M30s at all. Those are
vaguely.
So yeah, it's like pressed fentanyl tablets. They're kind of everywhere in the United States right now, but there's all sorts of opioids, and more and more often, I'm unfortunately so I review all the poisoning deaths for the nation. I help out with that. There's a group of us that does it, and I'm reading more and more, unfortunately, pediatric fentanyl fatalities because it's just so potent and so prevalent. And that's sad. We unfortunately don't get to treat those patients because by the time they're found, they're already deceased. Another trend that's been going through the roof is pediatric edible THC ingestions. Oh my goodness.
Not the gummies. Oh,
the gummies. So I live in Wisconsin. We're actually which is why we're a fully THC illegal state. So I'm surrounded by Minnesota, Illinois, Canada, and Michigan, where it's all legal. But we're not saved from it. We really pretty bad numbers too, because of the 2018 Farm Bill, which made any any product of a hemp plant legal. So the difference between cannabis and hemp, it's the same plant, the cannabis sativa plant. A hemp plant has 0.3% or less of delta 9 THC. That's what's in weed, right? But you can have as much delta 8, delta 10, delta 8 THC acetate, whatever you want. These are all psychoactive THC chemicals. And that's all now legal federally at a national level. So now we've had this explosion of delta 8 THC edible products here in my state. And I don't know if any of your listeners will be familiar with THC dosing.
We've had so many of, I think grandma's having a stroke, and we look at the bedside table and it's those dab pins, and I'm like, I think grandma's taking a trip right now.
Well, that's what's wild, is the THC market has changed so much, because now we have these super concentrated products. We're seeing things we never saw before. We used to be like, oh, your kid's high, okay, whatever, they'll be fine. Now I have kids eating 2,500 milligram chocolate bars and being in the ICU for 5 days on end-tidal CO2, because sometimes they're becoming apneic. It's like, what is happening? It's just a different landscape. So pediatric edible, I mean, yeah, guess what? If you make a drug look like a candy, children will eat it.
I was about to say, there's already so many that get into grandma's medicine cabinet, and the colorful orange and blue and all that. It looks like candy. I mean, yeah. So if you make a packaging that looks like candy, but one of the letters is misspelled, so you know, but your kid doesn't know because they don't pay attention. I barely pay attention. Shoot, I'm sure I would too. Like,
yeah,
not saying I do or I have, but
it's bad. In the 50s, there was candied aspirin. And it was literally candy aspirin. So people would ingest it. And they got rid of it because within 3 years of that being released, pediatrics were responsible for like 60% of all fatalities from aspirin. It was terrible. So I don't care if you put THC in. I'm just against things being not clearly labeled that they are misleading, and easily accessible. So yeah, we see a lot of kids. We do also get a lot of adult overdoses, and unfortunately the complexity of them are getting more and more complex over time. So while we've had less calls, they're getting more sick. We're seeing more deaths, more invasive interventions like ECMO, and it's a lot of suicidal overdose. It's also a lot of like, oh, I accidentally took 2 of my very dangerous antiarrhythmic. What do I do with that? Or and then a lot of things like cleaners, cosmetic products, all those kinds of things.
Well, even on your opioid overdoses, it's not just like, oh, we'll give them a spritz of Narcan. You don't, it's also like, I mean, we know, like, you don't know what it's laced with, but it's also like all these drugs you don't know about because you don't commonly come in interaction with them. They have to think about in the back of your head, like, is this fentanyl or is this carfentanil? Is this just, I don't know, is this just this one medication? Is it just Coke, or is it laced with fentanyl? So I'm not saying I'm calling poison control, but it's also, I feel like even in just the 4 years I've been doing this, overdoses are getting a little bit, not harder, but like, man, like I feel like I can't keep up with what's in this stuff anymore, which is also why you don't do drugs, but also like, it's hard for us, man. Like, I'm just trying to do my job.
Hey, man. So I'll say, here's the thing. In an overdose, that is a good reason to call poison control, because you can't, we're going to hear about
it. Yeah.
We track it. So we are part of the people who help monitor outbreaks of things. If you tell me that you're at a party and there's 6 kids on the floor, and then I hear about it from another paramedic somewhere else, I'm like, that's a bit of a spike. So like our poison center was actually involved in identifying, nobody's going to remember this because it was pre-COVID, but e-cigarette and vape associated lung injury, when all those kids were, their lungs were melting from vapes.
Popcorn lungs.
Yep. Yeah. It's very similar. And then there was, how about when we used to get people smoking synthetic marijuana, and then they would come into the ED bleeding out of their genitals, and we're like, what's going on here? Their INR was greater than 10, and we find out that it's contaminated with super warfarin rat poisons. So that was a huge outbreak in 2015, and it popped up again in 2017, I think.
Jesus.
So we're involved in all that too. So we help track. So if you're noticing something weird, definitely give us a call and just be like, hey, this was weird. And I want you to know in case someone else tells you it's weird, because we do help with some of that monitoring. And if any of your listeners want to learn a little bit more about what is out there in the synthetic drug market, I just released an episode with a forensic toxicologist, someone who kind of identifies drugs in people's blood and in drug products. And we actually, so what his job is, if you show up to the ER and I think you're intoxicated, like we'll draw a bunch of labs on you. We can only look for like 10 things.
Yeah.
But then we'll send the blood or urine off to this guy's lab, and he'll look for like 1,000 things. He'll look for things that we don't even have names for yet, but he can see it in his lab. And he'll even test drug product. And he'll list out what all these different drug products is. So it's called the Center for Forensic Science Research and Education Novel Psychoactive Substances Program. And they do quarterly reports that report out what's in drugs and what's in patients. So if you want to learn about like novel benzos like bromazolam, or N-pyridino idanitazine is a new opioid that's probably 40 times more. It's very similar to carfentanil. If you want to learn about all that stuff, there's a good episode out there, and you can check out this guy's lab's research as well. I think it's episode 30 of the Poison Lab. Gotta get that plug in there, right?
No, absolutely.
Mhm.
That's really all I had, my guys. Is there anything you want to add in? Anything you want to throw in or pass on?
Not really. You guys are doing the work that's keeping this nation from letting people die in their homes, and that sounds horrible.
What's your job description? I keep people from dying at home.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I know you guys are doing a million things, and it's just different mindsets, and it's so cool seeing you guys operate whenever I get to go out on a call. Scene safety. You're not in a controlled environment. There's a lot of stuff going on. Oh, can I ask you some questions?
Oh man, shoot, go ahead.
What's the can you speak for all of EMS and tell me?
I will not, but I can
And
speak
tell
from my
me
experience.
what's the concern surrounding occupational fentanyl exposure amongst paramedics and EMS?
Oh no. I know there are. It almost feels like a good divide on this subject because I respect our police officers. Let me just say that. My dad was a cop for years and years. But anyways, you have these videos of these officers who they get this white powdery substance on their arm and then they're passing out on the sidewalk. So yes, fentanyl exposure is a thing. The amount that you have to have actually ingested to have secondary overdose it's a pretty substantial amount that it makes you kind of wonder, what are you doing to have this? I personally, I keep my gloves on throughout a large majority of the call and even the transport because patients are gross. I don't know where your hands have been. So I keep my gloves on and I haven't had an instance yet. I'm also not poking needles and doing all this other stuff. So I've never had one. I don't know what everyone else is doing to get it, but I haven't. So
that's good. So you're first off, you're better than me. You wear gloves all the time. I wanted to bring this up because I do some education for our local EMS about this, and I've had a unique experience where I accidentally soaked my entire arm in about 400 micrograms of liquid fentanyl. And
that's terrifying. Yeah.
It's really not, though. Here's the reason why, because I was totally fine. I washed it off and nothing happened. And I actually wrote it up as a case report. So, and published it. It's called Accidental Exposure to a Large Volume of Liquid Fentanyl with No Resultant Clinical Effects. And I did that because I think there is a misaligned risk perception in our first responder community about what the actual risk is. So, you saw some stuff in the news about people getting touched by fentanyl and collapsing, and it's scary. And guess what? They were, in my opinion, experiencing very real symptoms.
Yeah.
very real symptoms
I'm
that
not going to
are
say it's an
involved.
overdose.
Right. So I think there's this problem in all of humans, the ways that we operate. It's called the availability heuristic. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but it's called like recency bias is another word for it.
Yeah.
But do you ever watch Shark Week?
Used to.
Okay. If you watch Shark Week and you go swimming, you definitely think you're going to get eaten by a shark, right? Or if you watch a scary movie and you go take your garbage out that night, you're like, oh, I'm about to be murdered. Even though your risk of being murdered is the exact same as it always was, right? So because humans don't have access to statistical modeling data of the universe just hardwired into our brain, we use the speed at which we can recall something to estimate its likelihood. And that makes sense from like an evolutionary standpoint, right? Like
Yeah.
if I live in a snake-ridden jungle and I see snakes all the time, I'm going to think about snakes all the time, and I am going to avoid if I hear a rattling in the bush, I'm probably going to think it's a snake, even though like 1 in 100 of those are snakes. But that's good because then I'm going to avoid bushes and not get bit by a snake, right? Okay. Here's the problem. The news right now, without doing any due diligence or fact checking, can put snakes on our TV and show us, oh my gosh, everybody's collapsing from snakes. Yeah. And guys, the unfortunate part is that then perpetrates, it actually worsens the recency bias because now I'm a first responder. I'm going to a scene where there are safety issues. I have medical things to think about. I have 100 real risks to assess. So how does my brain do it? Well, what's the first thing, the most recent thing that pops up in my mind, I'm going to deem to be one of the largest threats. So now let's say I get some powder on me and oh my gosh, I don't know what that is. Hey, I remember that news story about that person collapsing. Hey, I feel kind of shaky. Hey, I'm having real symptoms. Oh no, I have been exposed to a drug, fentanyl, whatever. Now I'm overdosing. This is called a self-propagating cycle, right? Because then they then go on the news and say the same thing. So I published my case report to help right the ship of what the real risk is of transdermal exposure. And there's actually a lot of published case reports of people even getting, because when you look in the news, there's nothing about testing these substances to be whether or not they actually were fentanyl. And right, I can give you 30 doses of Narcan right now. It doesn't mean that you've overdosed. I mean, I'd have to get it through the computer somehow, but it would.
I'd be impressed if you did. I'd just go with it. Be like, all right, I needed this.
So the news can put all this stuff out there, and I mean, it's really unfortunately a problem of the media. I don't blame anybody who's out there in a first responder scenario and concerned about real scene safety. That's a great thing to be concerned about. But when we put this stuff out there without fact checking, it then creates a boogeyman that's not real. And a lot of people have real things to be worried about. So why worry about something that's not? And so we have some resources out there called What the Fentanyl. This is a website, WTF Fentanyl or WT Fentanyl. And it summarizes a lot of this data. There's a few good journalistic kind of things out there. And I just wanted to share that as a resource to first responders who are looking for hard evidence, real scientific facts to support the low risk of transdermal brief exposure. If you do have access to that case report, the discussion goes through a lot of the science behind why it's unlikely. And there's actually even NIOSH, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. They have published public reports of first responders and law enforcement officers who actually were exposed to fentanyl on the field. They tested the substance, confirmed it was fentanyl. Then they had these officers all undergo, like they reviewed their medical records, and they all deemed that they did okay and actually had no opioid effects. So there's some great resources out there to help us right this ship. And I think EMS and paramedics are a very bright group that can understand, that sees some of this. And you guys work with law enforcement all the time. So you're one of our partners to help us get this information a little bit more accessible and help share some corrective information that might help people be a little bit less concerned. Because the last thing I would ever want is for someone to not try to resuscitate someone because they're concerned they're going to get secondary exposure.
Facts. And they have the fentanyl exposure protectant gloves that have like a powder on the inside. Those make my hands so itchy. I obviously would never want to overdose. I don't want to put narcotics in my body, et cetera, et cetera. But I would rather that than those itchy gloves
Wait,
because
the gloves have powder? What is
they
that?
have this powder on the inside of the glove that's like a barrier to fentanyl and opioids.
Oh,
It's so
no.
itchy. I don't ever want to overdose. I don't want to put
So
narcotics in my body, but I would rather that than that
oh,
itchy powder. Dude, and that's what
your skin is also a barrier to fentanyl.
right. That's why I
Not that
was
you should
like,
put it on there. So here's what's interesting.
you
There's
didn't
been some
absorb it. It's on your skin. Your skin is a natural protectant. Like
yeah.
what?
Listen, man. I wear your gloves. Regular gloves are fine. Two of the major toxicology organizations in the United States put out a position statement on pre-hospital or first responder um, exposure prevention, and they even say nitrile gloves are just fine.
Just fine.
And you know, I want to put this out here too. I have a doctorate in like basically assessing drug action, absorption, and pharmacokinetics, and I get called by people throughout the entire state on when they get weird chemical exposures, and I manage them. And I I I I know this sounds like I'm blowing smoke up my own abilities here, but there's few people as qualified to assess a fentanyl exposure than myself at this given moment. And even when I soaked my hand in fentanyl, knowing all of those things, I was like, "Oh my god, I'm gonna die." So I just want to point out, like, it's a super normal gut check reaction because of all the stuff out there in the news.
Yeah.
Oh my god. And
Immediately.
then it took a second, and I was like, "Oh, okay, maybe."
I'm actually fine.
Yeah.
I'm more scared. I don't use our nitro paste. That's just me. Ask me about that later. Whatever. I have gripped a nitro paste. It was completely on accident. I was still very fresh as an EMT, but I gripped that thing and it took a solid 5 minutes for it to actually do anything. I mean, when it started working, it worked. But I mean, even still, like that's me. It's open in my hand and I'm gripping it. And that took 5 minutes. So that's another reason I'm like,
Yeah.
anyways.
It wearing gloves is a great idea.
Yeah, highly recommend. If you have a nitro paste on the bench seat, don't just hold it in your hand.
Gonna get
Your
that
partner ends up getting
nice
very mad
headache.
at you. Um,
All right. Well, that was all. I figured you have a great audience to hear a little bit of that messaging.
oh yeah, no, it's good stuff, and I think it needs to be talked about. One of my friends he runs a podcast, but he had a very heated discussion about a case of this officer who claimed she was having a fentanyl overdose
Hey, man.
and that's the biggest thing is always like I look at like when you see those videos, you see the body cam footage, if they're breathing, like even on my calls, like if they're breathing,
Right.
leave 'em
There's been some
alone.
actual studies published on the reports of the symptoms reported in the body cam and the news media, and like they actually look at the percentage of them that are consistent with opioid overdose, and unfortunately, many of them are not. They are very consistent with the somatic effects of concern over being exposed to an opioid, though. That is true. I'm not going to weigh in on what is real or not without being part of the medical care team, but
Correct.
hopefully, people can use the scientific and objective evidence that I've supplied to help make informed decisions.
But that's all I had, my guy. If you want to add anything else you want to throw in.
No, but if you guys have any of those extra cool backgrounds, feel free to.
Amazon proof what is it? Amazon soundproof tiles
I
and
love it.
letters from Geoff Murphy at Master Your Medics.
That's awesome. I love it. Way to go.
But I appreciate you, my guy. I thank you again, like seriously, for all of you have a lot of experience and tons of wisdom and knowledge in the poison control. What's that number again for the
1-800-222-1222? No. Thank you. This has been really fun, and I'm glad to get to meet you and
oh yeah,
thanks for
man.
doing what you're doing. This is a cool show.
But Ryan, if that's all you have, that is all I have. And as I end every single episode, so with that.
The 22 at the Lips podcast is designed to support, not replace, the relationship that exists between a practitioner and his or her medical director. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host, guest, and not necessarily of Master Medics. The information provided during this podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for your approved protocols.
And we're done.
Wow. Again,